Good evening and welcome to the Gilroy Central School District uh, Equity and Diversity Committee meeting. Today is February 24th. I will hand our agenda over to Nizad. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I'm happy to see you all.
A lot about equity and racial and diversity, and we talked about how there are a lot of other programs that and committees that work on equity, like special education and that type of stuff, making things equitable for students that have certain abilities. So that I think we decided that it was really important for us to bring in the racial and ethnic pieces to this committee and to also help bring those pieces into the other committees to help create equity across the board. Do you all recall that conversation?
Great comment. I was just going to say that was going to take us to our next point. We met as a steering committee, but that's fine. Okay, so with that, we were able to transition into our next point on the agenda, which is reviewing our charge to the committee. It can be seen within the agenda on the hyperlink. I'm just pulling that up as well right now. So basically, regarding the charge, we as a steering committee met on Monday, and we have deliberately decided that race is an immediate focus of the committee. With that, we have established that as a long-standing committee, our goals and our focuses will change as time continues for the best interest of our students and community within the district. But as of right now, our immediate focus is race, so we can try and tackle that. So do we have any comments? Oh, yeah, Barb. You're good.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I know we had that discussion, but I don't recall taking a vote that we're going to exclude all the other things. When we set up our committee, we deliberately, wanted equity for all kids, and we didn't want to just zero in on one particular thing. And I just don't understand why we would simply, as a committee now, sort of violate our charge with equity so that all the kids in our district can be successful. To divide our citizenry and our students simply by race, to me, is really biased. And, I would sort of like to see if everybody feels that, we should judge people by the color of their skin versus what they need, be they the disabled, poor, people of color, whatever. I'm just sort of flabbergasted that the steering committee made this decision that we would only concentrate on race as a committee, when that really wasn't our charge. Our charge was to be all inclusive. So, maybe I misread our charter, and when we had the discussion at the table of a school board, it was to make things equitable for all students and not to the exclusion of others. And I think Nicole said, well, we do have, other departments that deal with the disabled. Do we have other departments that deal with poverty? Do we have, other departments that deal with gender? I just don't see us narrowing our focus so much that we exclude these other children who are equally in need.
Okay. I think that's an excellent point. I'm just gonna I'm assuming that we'll have other people within the raised hands list who might, either conform to the idea or conflict it. So I think we can go down and see what other people are saying. I have Seema next.
Hi, so I just wanted to talk about, respond to Barb's comment, and I'll actually use Marie's analogy, which I think was great. Barb, being on the policy committee, right, we can't address all of the policies at once, right? We kind of rotate through. And so we talked about, first of all, we talked about a lot of these issues in terms of being equitable for students. A lot of them intersect, right? So we can talk about race and at the same time be talking about a bunch of different things. They're not independent of one another, but we have to start somewhere. We can't focus on every single group of students. And so, just like we've done on policy, when things have come up that are emergent and we see that there's a need and it's never been addressed, this has never been addressed at Gilderland Central School District, as far as I know. I don't know how long, 97, so I've been, probably even before that, there's never, ever been a group to discuss race, ever. So we know from, read the Enterprise, read emails, we know that race is an issue. It would be completely ignorant on our part to ignore that and to not start with race. The fact that it keeps coming up as a discussion, the fact that people are not wanting to talk about it so much, to me, says we need to talk about it even more so. So it's not that we're not talking about those other groups. We will get to them, but we can't address all of those groups at the same time because we'll never get anything done. And this is the emergent need. And so we have to pick something to start with, and we decided that that would be race.
Great points.
Here's out. If I could just respond as being part of the steering committee, I think as part of our conversation, we know that there are so many topics within the areas of equity, diversity, inclusion, and anti-racism, which are the main points of our charge, that as a longstanding committee of the board that we'll be addressing. But just to echo what Seema said, we would be doing a disservice to anything if we tried to do everything all at once. And as we decided as a group that it would be a good idea to have a steering committee, I think it's important that we allow the steering committee to help steer our work so that we can be a productive group. And I think the first goal of that, the first role of being a productive group is breaking up like we're going to do today in our subcommittees. And then the subcommittees can really take a look at the charge, take a look at the learning component. And the goal today is to take some first steps as a subcommittee. And I think we can really get into some deep dives of conversation and next steps when we get into our subcommittees.
Great points. All I'm going to ask is if you get the ability to just speak your piece or whatever you're going to say, just put down your hand just for the fluid of discussion. But next, though, I do have Elizabeth.
Okay, I wanted to say that I wanted to go back to what this committee didn't just come out of nowhere. It came out of a context. And the context was a Linwood mother called Michelle Charles spoke to the board a number of times starting in 2018 about her complaints about her children being called things like, told things like your skin is the color of poop, or your hair looks like a Q-tip, or various things. She also had a lot of complaints about Colonial Day, which romanticized the frontier colonial spirit and didn't take into account what was happening with Black people at that time. You had to either dress as a pioneer woman or a pioneer guy, and there was nobody, nobody thought about, well, what about Black people? So she had a lot of complaints about that and other things, the way that her children were addressed by teachers, or the way that she was talked to by teachers about things she raised. She eventually left the school district in 2020. Also in 2020, after George Floyd was killed by the police, a number of young women who had graduated Gilderland recently in the last few years talked with Marie Wiles on the phone and told her about complaints, and other board members too, complaints that they'd had in their time at Gilderland with things about the curriculum being extremely whitewashed and Eurocentric, nothing taught about Africa, no faculty that looked like them, and inadequate response by adults when people made racist comments that they heard. And when all this happened, Superintendent Wiles told the Enterprise in an article last July, if we do not seize this moment to make real changes, shame on all of us. She also said that the district's curriculum cabinets need to look at what is being taught and what is lacking. And the formation of this committee was announced soon after that. So I don't think it's a coincidence, and I don't think that we're like, you know, if we're talking about, you know, if we were a committee that was supposed to be looking at how the situation is for people with disabilities, we wouldn't find people saying, oh, well, we have to also talk about able-bodied people. Don't forget, able-bodied people are also important. It's only when you talk about Black people that people start saying, well, what about white people? And what about everybody else? Everybody else is important too. You know, if we're talking about lesbian and gay and bisexual and transgender people, we're not going to be saying, well, what about straight people? They also matter. It's only when you say, let's focus on people of color, that everybody gets uncomfortable and says, oh, we got to broaden it to include the entire world.
Very informative points. Thank you. Next, I have Barbara.
I guess I want to dispute what both Elizabeth and Seema have said. When we were alerted to deficiencies in our curriculum, immediately a curriculum subcommittee was established to look at our social studies and other curriculums to correct those deficits. When colonial days were brought up, that day was changed. So it's not like we haven't been alerted to deficiencies that we've had in our past and haven't responded. I think Marie and her staff have responded beautifully. So as I said, I'm just puzzled by saying that, you know, if you talk about straight people, then you have to talk about gay people and all that. I have no problem discussing these issues, but where is the data, concrete data? When we looked at the data that began us thinking about this committee, one of the biggest groups that seemed to have a lot of needs were the poor, and the poor come in all kinds of colors. And that was the thing that we were sort of caught our attention, that those children that come from economic backgrounds that aren't as affluent as many in the district were suffering educationally. And our focus at that time was to say, let's look at this data. I'd like to see the data that really says that we need to focus all our attentions on a racist problem that, I don't know, maybe I'm blind, but I don't see it as a primary need. I think it's a need that we have addressed and will continue to address. But the students of poverty in our district also need a heck of a lot of help and attention. And I just hate to see that going by the wayside, even momentarily. I suspect if you look at the data that may be even the largest group that needs attention. But I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you. So right now I have Seema and then I have Tibisai. And Leah, are you clicking the thing to speak or no? Because it like keeps flashing back and forth. Okay.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah. So I got Seema and then I got Seema and I got Tibisai.
Okay, thanks, Mirzad. Barb, this is not a response to a curriculum piece that was missing. Yes, Michelle Charles brought that piece up, but that is a drop in an ocean of issues in the school district having to do with race. And it doesn't address racism that a ton of people have said they've experienced. I've experienced in my time in Guilderland, and even living in Guilderland still. Like, there's never, I already mentioned this, there's never been a committee or group to focus on race. And yes, when we looked at the ESSA data, there were two big groups of students who were not being helped. One was students of poverty, and one was students of color. And not surprisingly, a lot of that overlaps, that intersects. So looking at students of color is not ignoring any other groups, but this has been an issue, like Elizabeth said, the only issue that people push back on so hard. And so I don't understand why, when we have to pick something. We can't talk about every single group of students at once. And we will talk about other issues. Just like you said, we're thinking about all kinds of equity. We have to start somewhere, and race has never been addressed. It's 2021. And if I remember, Barb, at a board meeting, when we talked about those students, the alumni and their issues and their problems that they had in Guilderland, the racist problems that the racism that they experienced, your response was shock. And I remember saying to you, if you're paying attention, you shouldn't be shocked at this. This has been going on for years in Guilderland and never addressed. And I think Dr. Wiles is right on point when she said it would be, would just be totally wrong to not take the momentum of this time and go and keep going with it.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So I have Tibisai, Nidra, then I have Deanne and Elizabeth, and then I'm gonna ask that we wrap up for our next activity, please.
Okay, I wanted to make mention of the fact that there are identities that are visible and invisible. And while poverty is something that definitely cuts across many different identities, we have to think about the fact that when a person thinks about a marginalized community and we add the component of race to that marginalized community, it diminishes the social capital that that person has. So for example, if you have a LGBTQ person and they're Black, it hinders their social capital in our society. If you have poverty and they're Black, it hinders their social capital in our society. And a lot of times when we concentrate on those intersections and try to find those communities that are being most affected by multiple identities that diminish their social capital, what comes out of it is a framework that can then be scaled up to meet other communities that are also suffering with similar issues. And I'll point to our free and reduced lunch program, which was started initially in Chicago as an African-American breakfast program. That program was then adopted by our federal government and then scaled up to help other marginalized, poor, white, Black, brown children. So when we think about our most needy, right, when we dive deeper and try to look at those who are most in need because of intersections of identities, because of things that they cannot control or help, which we've talked about before, race is a visible thing that signals different things to different people. Poverty is something that we can hide, whether it be by clothing, how we show up, it can be hidden. People don't necessarily know what your socioeconomic status is upon seeing you. However, race is not that. And even if you have socioeconomic status that is higher, you are still impacted by people thinking that you're less than, that you're not as qualified, that you're not as intellectually able. These are things in our society that have been a part of the ocean, right? And we're swimming in it every single day. And it affects how we see things. So I think that we should consider that. We should consider the intersections. And like everyone has said, no one is ignoring the other factors. We are just trying to ensure that we find the populations that are hurt the most right now in this immediate need, figure out how we can help that population so then we can start scaling out to other intersecting communities. Thank you.
Very wise. I think we had Nidra next.
I was just going to comment on the time and the fact that we are going to break up into subcommittee groups. So the smaller group might be a good place to continue these discussions, just so we can be mindful of the other things on our agenda, as valuable as the comments and thoughts that everyone is sharing.
I think that in that case, if we wanted to limit the time maybe for Ms. Johnson and Elizabeth's statements to, I don't know, would a minute be fair? Okay. Yeah, Ms. Johnson, you got the floor.
I certainly won't take long, and I just wanted to say that I appreciated this clarification because I too spent a lot of time processing the charge and what it meant to me and what my why was in all of this and what our why could be or should be in all of this. And what I didn't hear the last time that I did hear tonight that certainly made me feel better was that it seemed like to me some of the other topics were dismissed during the last meeting, and it felt like that they weren't going to be addressed. But hearing you say tonight that we are going to focus on the most pertinent, most important topic now, and that we would get to the other ones meant something. So thank you for that.
Thank you for that. And Elizabeth, you have the final say in this case.
I just wanted to say that, I think it would be presumptuous of us, a very small committee, to try to reproduce the entire mission of the school district. I've said this before at these meetings, but the district's mission is to help every child to become everything that they can be academically and as a person. That's as I understand it. Maybe that's a reduction, but so if we say to, okay, we're going to help every single child become everything that they can be, why do we think that we can do that? Us, 20? When an entire school of teachers and parents and kids and have been working at this for decades. I mean, we need to have a smaller focus to be able to accomplish anything. So that's all. We need to have a focus.
Okay, thank you for that. Just before we enter our subcommittees, just a quick explanation can be that is a great reason for our subcommittee since it's such a smaller value and how much more people can contribute within the small group. But moving on from that, today's learning component is discussed in the article "You Push, We Steer: Power Dynamics and Anti-Racism Work" by Damani Farley from Common Thread Consulting. So I hope that you read it all. The article can be found via the link in the agenda you all were sent and instructed to read prior to the meeting. So our discussion questions for tonight, which will be spoken in your subcommittee, are: what parts of the article do you think speak to our purpose as a committee? Have you ever seen the actions and impact of gatekeeping in the real world? What can you do to have an impact alongside beneficial gatekeepers? And finally, in what ways can this committee enter POC to steer? What other ways can you apply what you've read in the article to support this work in the Guilderland Central School District? So, as I mentioned, these topics will be spoken about in your subcommittee breakout rooms. So I'm just going to read down the list. I think you all should know by now. But in communications, we have Dr. Wiles, Mr. Laster, Maxine, Andy, and Kelly. In engagement, we have Barb, Elizabeth, Nora Whiteside, Nora Ebersman, Sandra Savage, Nicole, Tipisai, and Nidra. And then in research, we have myself, Leah, Luis, and Ben. And finally, in our internal equity audit, we have Gloria, Joe, Ms. Johnson, Seema, and Dr. Horalchik. So just wanted to say, after about 35 minutes, we're just going to ask you to return from the breakout rooms and report back.
So Mirzad, let me jump in here for a minute. I'm going to just add that Mr. Johnson will also be in the internal equity audit. So when we go to breakout rooms, only one group can continue to be live streamed because we can't have the YouTube channel doing 4 things at once. So we picked the internal audit, equity audit group to be the one who is live streamed tonight. We're going to talk more about how we do this in the future. So as that group is doing its learning, you will continue to be viewed live. The other groups, we're going to be not viewed live. And I've set the timer for 35 minutes. So whoever is facilitating your time, you've really got to watch the clock. At 35 minutes, you're automatically going to come back to the large group.
I would just say before we break out into breakout rooms, for all of you, it's important that subcommittees refer to the guidance document we've shared with you all. And we hope that you all can establish a main person for contact and schedule an additional meeting for the subcommittees to meet outside of these larger meetings. So following that, we'll address public comments if we've received any, and finally adjourn the meeting. So I think that I saw that Nidra had a hand up, but if she doesn't have the thing to say anymore, we can enter breakout rooms.
Just to say that the subcommittees each have a folder in the shared drive. And so when you click on your subcommittee folder, there's a document in there with information for the subcommittees and those points that Mirzad had mentioned about establishing a person to be the point of contact, and also the meetings and some other things to guide your subcommittee meeting. So that's in your folder in the shared drive.
So if we're ready, I'll open up the meeting rooms and cross my fingers that it worked. Okay, we'll see you all in your small groups and then back together shortly.
Okay. Nicole, I think there's a different room for you, right? You're muted, so I can't hear you.
Oh, there she goes.
Oh, there we go. Okay. Hey, everybody.
Hi.
Hi.
Gloria, right? In this group?
What's that?
Gloria's in this group too, right? But she's not here.
Yep. I was just going to say Gloria's in this group. She wasn't sure if she was going to be able to make it, but it turns out that she wasn't. So we have 35 minutes, so we can kind of keep an eye on our clock for 8:05. So we'll try and spend, we'll try and spend 15, 20 minutes, probably a good 20 minutes on the article, and then the rest of the time looking over the subcommittee guidance. Our goal is to come up with who's going to be like the main, person who's going to report out to the big group, and figure out when our first actual subcommittee meeting is going to be, because the goal is for us to meet at least one time before the next big committee meeting. Does that make sense? Go ahead, Seema. We're a small group, so we can.
Oh, okay. I don't want to be the person, but I'll take notes. So I know we have to establish some of these things, so I can just take notes in our folder.
Thank you.
Sure.
We can have it rotate if.
Yeah, that sounds good. That sounds
Okay.
good. And in the subcommittee guidance, it talks about roles, so we can kind of get there when we get to that part of it. But how about we start with the learning component? Did everybody get a chance to read the article?
Yep.
Awesome. So why don't we just go through the questions? So the first question is, what parts of the article do you think speak to our purpose as a committee?
I'm happy to share a response. Okay. One of the things that came across to me is that we can't kind of confuse our own personal journeys and what we're doing with the purpose and mission of the subcommittee and the broader committee itself. That it sounds like it's easy for that to get intermingled at times, and that's something where you're consistently reflecting and making sure that you're working on that in its own mindful way.
I actually read the article twice. And it's interesting how when I read it the first time, certain things spoke to me. And then I read it again before the meeting tonight, and other things spoke to me. But what my focus when reading it was, I don't want to say it was opposite of what Joe picked up from it, but I read it with myself in mind, and what have I done? What shouldn't I have done? What do I need to do better? Where have I seen this? And I'm just going to toggle. You can steer me, but I didn't print the article. Something that really struck me, and I think maybe just because of the nature of my job and the nature of things that are happening right now, but one of the things I hear often was that they were raised in a different time, and I think in thinking about the purpose of the committee, is to be mindful of all that, but somehow I think of myself selfishly, how can I not think that way? And how can we listen, really listen to the others? So those are the kind of things that went through my mind when I read it. And then the gatekeeping, that's a whole different question.
Yeah, the gatekeeping was huge. I think, to respond to what Joe said, Joe, you really struck a chord with me, and it's interesting. I was having a conversation with somebody else earlier today about that very thing, that, we're part of this committee, and our goal of this committee is to lead the district in its efforts to be inclusive, equitable, promote diversity, and anti-racism, right? And so at the same time, we are embedding these learning components because we recognize that those of us on the committee and anybody who is watching at this point, the learning components are beneficial. So they're not working at cross purposes. They're working, on the same train tracks in the same direction. But I do think that's an important thing for us to keep in mind, that the purpose of our committee meetings are not to teach us. The purpose of our committee meetings is to do some real work, to actually, especially our group, our internal equity audit. Our group is to really dive deep into our district and identify where the needs are when it comes to, diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism. And yes, educating ourselves is going to be part of that work, but we can't take up all of our committee meetings in doing that learning component. I think we've embedded them because it is an important part of doing the work, but it can't be the bulk of the work, right? Because that won't be productive. But the other piece, Dan, and you said it, the gatekeeping piece. There are the different types of gatekeepers. I thought was really interesting, and it reminded me of like the cultural competency continuum, and like what role you play and where you are on the spectrum of the work, and what role you play, and how you have like a self-awareness to the impact of the different things that you might bring to the table.
Can I say something?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I liked the last section there, the title of it, like retrofitting. What did it say? We can't retrofit justice into unjust systems. I really like that. So I guess thinking about the whole reading in terms of like exposing and dismantling racism. So if we're looking at like a systems level, I'm thinking of, you can't do it all at once. You can't make all the changes at once. And I think all of us probably know in education, everything takes a long time. So, making small changes would be something, I guess that's what I got out of it. And kind of to your point, Amy, is I think even with, I guess, any board work or committee work, the educating piece is outside. Like you're constantly, like we all join this because we're interested. So we're probably reading things, watching things, listening to podcasts about this. And then when we come to the meetings, we're sharing, but we're really kind of leading the district. And I don't know when this was brought up because I have water dripping from my ceiling. So I'm just frazzled right now. But someone mentioned, us being experts or not being experts. And like, I just wanted to make it clear that I don't think any of us are experts in this field, but I think putting this group together and figuring out who are the experts and who can help us is a big step. And so I just didn't want people to think that like, oh, we're the authority on like anti-racism, because I'm not. And I do work having to do with anti-racism, but I'm definitely not an expert in this. So I kind of got off on a tangent, but that's just something I want to add.
I guess I would just, sorry, I would just want to add, reading this, it was again, a reminder about how uncomfortable these conversations can be. And remembering back to a few years ago when our leadership team started this journey, and in the books that we read and the conversations we had, and Amy, you and I have had 100 conversations around equity and racism and anti-racism. And me personally, it has really helped me become educated and tackle tough conversations with my family and my own children. And so every time I have another conversation, I'm just that much more thankful to be aware, and certainly appreciate the work we're doing.
So the second question was, have you ever seen the actions and impact of gatekeeping in the real world, and what can you do to have an impact alongside beneficial gatekeepers?
I mean, I don't know which kind of gatekeeping, but that intro to the meeting, I would say was gatekeeping in some way, but I don't know which kind. I guess just the idea of, well, I'll let other people talk and let me think about it a little bit.
I would say that I've seen those types of gatekeeping. What was useful is to help me kind of put maybe some words to it that I wouldn't have come up with on my own. But I've seen it, and then there's times where I wish I had been braver as a person when I looked at some of those things. That it caused me to think, and part of my takeaway was I need to consistently reflect on my actions, motivations, and decisions, and work for them to conform to the advancement of our work. Being conscious and aware of what I'm doing.
I looked at it the same way you did, Joe. I definitely have seen them. I think we would be kidding ourselves if we said we didn't. And I think that the challenge is to be willing to acknowledge you might be someplace and take a stand to make a difference, even if it's acknowledging that you're doing this, and then, okay, I should do this. Or I was part of a conversation today where I was talking about a children's book author and whether or not that book, some believe, should be in on the shelves, or some believe should not be on the shelves. And the statement was made, well, that was a different time. But what I should have said was, let's continue that conversation, because this is, I'm part of this that is trying to do this, and I didn't. And so I think that's something we need to be willing to do without thoughts of, without being afraid to do it, I guess.
So I guess when I've seen the word gatekeeper, I think of it 100% negative. Like, to me, a gatekeeper is somebody who holds power over a particular process or idea or, tangible, something that people want, and they're the one that closes the gate and doesn't allow people in. And the purpose, like in my head prior to reading this article, like the purpose of a gatekeeper is to not allow people through the gate. So like Joe said, it was interesting to put some words into different kinds of gatekeepers, and that it almost shifted the definition for me, in that there are some, there are certainly some of the negative ones like I already had in my head, but there are some that instead of their main purpose to be closing the door, their main purpose is to be opening the door. And that's something as a white woman in our society, in a role of school leadership, and then also in the role of on this committee, is something that I feel like is on me to keep the door open for people, and to allow this work, not just, not to allow the work to happen, but to make it happen. So I thought that was kind of an interesting way to think of a gatekeeper, is that you could help the progress happen.
I was also thinking of, especially in the last year, obviously, like we've seen a lot of articles and just, topics having to do with anti-racism brought up. And so I would see like a lot of people, I think, would fall into the guard gatekeepers, like just not saying anything, just avoiding, because it's not being, you know, if you're doing something and you're being racist to people, then you're on this negative side, you're racist, you don't want to be that person. But it's so much easier to just stay in the middle, right? And then allow that to continue and say nothing. And if the ball, you know, falls in your court and you're like, oh, I can't really do anything about it. And just not taking any ownership that we're all have a piece in this. I feel like I see that a lot. And I think just like Joe and Dee said, that this really helped explain, or I guess put it in categories and some names to the ideas that I was thinking about, because I feel like I've seen people that have fallen into these categories. And then something else that Dee mentioned about like not saying something. I think we talked about when this topic, I think, came up with the board. I remember we were talking about brave spaces, and that just being really, it's a challenge, like that we're still learning, and there has to be like some space to like, you know, mess up and then keep trying, because it's a learning process. It's also like I struggle with this because I also think of people who have their kids here who maybe join this committee because they want this work to be done yesterday, you know? And so they don't have time for everybody else to, you know, learn and catch up to where they are because their kids are in school now and their kids are being impacted. So I struggle with that piece because we're all like in different spots. And so it's like you want to give people space to learn. But I see these people that fall into these categories of gatekeepers, and they really kind of stop that process. And I don't know, I struggle with, I guess, all of that.
So our third and final question is, in what ways can this committee center people of color to steer? What other ways can you apply what you have read in the article to support this work in the Guilderland Central School District?
I think we need to be a permission to fail, grace-giving, trying group of people that encourage all of what we're about, you know, that brave space, that time for some people, that understanding that we're not going to get it right the first time. I think honest conversation without, I can't think of the word, without judgment. And if we're doing that and we're reflecting it, then it's going to, you know, my hope would be that it would catch on and others would do the same. And then we'd create this, you know, environment that would hopefully then kind of seep out, not like Seema's water.
Almost like in a permission kind of way. Like, we're leading this work, we're doing it, we're sharing it, we're exposing ourselves in this brave space, which gives permission to others, for others to do the same. And that to me is the steering part, right? You push, we steer. So the pushing is you're letting people know, hey, we can do this work. We can do this work. But, you know, I know in the larger committee, it's been brought up a number of times about the racial makeup of the members of the committee. And I really think that that's where our subcommittees can bring on a more diverse group. So like at this point, our committee is what it is, but like us as an internal audit committee and the other committees, as we are a little bit more productive and get the work done, that's when we can bring, you know, other people who wanted to be on this committee and we just didn't have the space for everybody. And also just other people of different backgrounds, different races, different, you know, different people, so that we can center people of color more in the work that we're doing.
I think there are people out there that maybe didn't want to be on the committee, but would appreciate input. I can think of, you know, some parents or some kids that really don't want to do this, but would love to share. And I think including them.
Yeah.
And I think we have staff too, and I think our particular, there are other subcommittees also, but our particular subcommittee, one of the things that we're going to be doing is really taking a deep dive into people's experiences in the Gilliland Central School District. And, you know, not only what does the raw data show, but what do people's experiences show? And that's where we can include anybody and everybody who's had some kind of intersection with the district and would like to share their input.
Yeah. One thing I noted for an answer to C was we need consistent, deliberate solicitation of the voices that our committee is purporting to represent, right? And that includes listening to understand, not just like waiting for your turn, not just wanting to be heard, but those were the thoughts that were going through. That's what I wrote down as I was reflecting on the article.
Seema, if you're taking notes, write that one down. Not just waiting for your own voice to be heard, but listening for others.
Thank you.
Okay. I was just going to say also, you know, when we put the committee together, I remember there was, I guess, a lot of feedback on who was picked, why were they picked, that, like, just like you said, Amy, the racial makeup of the committee. And so we have that student group that was one, you know, section of the committee. So you had to pick students from there. And I remember getting emails from people about why are there not students of color in this group? And I said, oh, you know, we had to pick from the students who sent letters of interest. But then I pushed, you know, I kind of thought back to what I did. And I'm like, did I make a mistake? Did I not push hard enough to try and include, to try, you know, make it a favorable environment so other people would want to join? But then I also struggle with the fact that, like, well, you probably read a lot of things about this type of work being on the shoulders of people of color, and, you know, that they're carrying that heavy lift. So I struggle with, I guess it would depend, right? Like if people want to be involved, and we should give them that space to do that, but we shouldn't be relying on them as well.
Pushing them too.
Yeah, pushing them too. So that's, I guess, just something that I've been thinking about.
And perhaps that's where the subcommittee work comes in, is that's the place to, you know, maybe cast a broader net and be really welcoming and say, this isn't, you know, on your shoulders in public, but the input piece, be like you were saying. Anybody want to say anything else to wrap up the discussion of the article before we move on to the subcommittee guidance?
Well, maybe this would be the bridge to the and start the sirens. Just like totally took my train of thought outside my window. Go on, it might come back to me. Go ahead.
Amy, you're muted. Are you talking?
No, I'm not. I was waiting for the sirens to go.
No, I just wanted
sorry.
to allow anybody else who had a final thing to say.
I think, and I remembered, and this would be maybe a bridge between somehow this subcommittee, I really feel, needs to build a rapport with, and I think once that rapport is built, then Seema, I think we'll see more want to contribute. Maybe there's a little bit of apprehension of what do they really want to do? What are they really going to do? But once you build a rapport and a permission giving environment that we're going to listen to and we're going to be quiet while we're doing it, is a good thing.
That's a great point, Dee. And I remember too, when we first started talking about this committee, and I was talking to like a mom friend who's Black, and we were, just talking about this work in general. And she said, please don't tell me that you're starting a committee. And I was like, I know that's not the end all be all, but we have to start somewhere. So, but I think you're right. Like making it a welcoming place and building the rapport, I guess that building the trust, right? That we're in it to actually to do the work. And this is not just some kind of, facade that we're putting out there. Check off that box that we're taking care of this work. But yeah, I think figuring out how to build that rapport and trust with people, I think you're right, is really important.
All right, Joe, Rican, anything else? We're good? All right, well, that was a great discussion. So we have about 10 minutes, and our goal is to decide on a point person who's going to field emails, deliver reports to the larger committee, et cetera. we need to establish a date for our first subcommittee. And I think I mentioned our goal is to meet as a subcommittee within the next month. So before our next larger committee group, and then start considering, what some priorities, what are some first steps. I feel like in my just experience, and we can kind of talk through some different ideas, but like going off of what Seema said, like, tell me you're not going to do a committee because oftentimes committees aren't productive. It's helpful if we have, between each meeting, we have like a to-do list, like, okay, these are the things we're going to do, and then review them and do them between each meeting so that we can get some forward momentum there. So, so starting with number one, point person to serve as a contact for the committee.
Are we nominating? I don't want to do it.
Doesn't matter to me.
I prefer not to do it, but we'll certainly do other things.
Okay. Joe, your thoughts? Is it something you really want to do? Like, will do if you have to?
I would do it if it was needed. I wasn't going to nominate myself for the role, but if need be.
Yeah, I think we're all kind of like, I don't mind doing things like that.
You want to do it, Amy? Like, do you feel comfortable?
Yeah, I'm comfortable.
Well, I think we talked about like the subcommittees having that point person is important because we just talked about like other people wanting to be involved, and instead of having to filter through the larger group, then we can directly, guide people to the right subcommittee so they can just work with them. But instead of 5 of us or however many getting emails all the time, it's like a disaster. So,
if you don't mind,
I don't mind.
It makes a certain amount of sense to me that you're also on the committee's steering committee. So
yeah, that's fine.
It makes a certain amount of sense if you're good with that.
Yeah, that's fine with me. That's fine with me. So establishing a date for the first subcommittee. Do we want to talk about, are there days of week that work better or worse, or times of day that work better or worse for people?
Yeah, and I'm happy to organize like a doodle poll that we can do for each month, at least we can map through June for now, right?
Good idea.
Okay, so how about for the moment, if folks just want to give me, what would probably be more helpful if I'm going to set up the poll is to give me the not would work as opposed to what would, and then I can try to design the polls around that. So is there anything that needs to be taken out of the running?
School hours.
Yeah. I figured it would be outside school hours, yes.
But I'm an early person too, so it can be.
Right, so is that our school out? What are your school hours, Dan?
At Westmere, we are 7:20 to 2:50.
Okay.
But other than that, anything is fine.
This time works for me. Like, obviously, when we're not meeting as the large group, I teach Wednesdays till like 6:30. So, but I know like this 7 o'clock time for this larger group is, I kind of save that spot, but I have some flexibility too.
Okay.
Obviously, like board Tuesdays, that would be out.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, I'm pretty flexible. I'd prefer to not meet between 5:30 and 7. It's just the family dinner time. If my kids want to eat, I should probably cook something. So, yeah,
would it be simpler just to keep it a Wednesday at 7 because that's our normal meeting?
Yeah.
So one of the alternating. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
I wouldn't mind if we shifted to like 7:15 just to give me a little bit of a buffer, but I can make the 7 o'clock. No way, Seema.
No, it's fine.
Okay.
Gotta push it there, huh?
That was easier than I expected. So
yeah.
So it's almost thinking like of a formula where it's like, is it skip one? You know what I mean? It's like going to be 2 a month. One will be the full committee, and then we meet kind of.
Yeah, that sounds perfect.
Yeah. Okay. 7:15.
So in 2 weeks, which will be what, the 10th?
Yep. Yep. Okay. So I can send out some calendar.
Yeah. Regan, do you want to send out the Google Meet for us?
Sure.
So
Once
Joe will
we
send
get
out. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm happy to.
Once
Who
we
is
get the
it?
dates. Sorry?
I'll send the meet out. Is that?
Do you want, if you want to send out the calendar and Regan will add the Google Meet for us?
Yeah. That sounds good.
Wednesday, March 10th.
Perfect. All right. So we have 5 minutes. I don't mean to be the taskmaster here, but we want to consider like things to do next and priorities. I guess it would probably be a really good idea just to make sure we all have the same definition of internal equity audit.
Yep.
Right?
I mean, I joined because I thought, like, I don't know if it's ever been done before at the district. I don't know, like Marie would know, but to get some kind of pulse of what's happening with people in the district in terms of all kinds of equity. Like when we heard from those students or the alumni last summer, like it's much more powerful to hear from the students directly. And so to have some kind of, I know there's different kind of instruments that are out there that we could probably look at first to see, if we can replicate that or use something that's, why reinvent the wheel. But it would be really helpful to me to have some kind of, I'm not saying is some data, I guess, at the end of this to substantiate why we need to do this work. Like clearly, even the larger committees wondering, do we need to do work on race, for example? And then I get emails, especially when this equity committee was put together at first, I'll get emails about where's the data in the district that shows that you need to talk about race. Like 3 pages of questions about like, what are the incidences at the school, which I know, and we all know because we've talked about things or read things, but to have like one cohesive document with data, I think would be awesome. So at least that's what I thought of with this audit.
So do you mean anecdotal data or do you mean mathematical data?
Probably both.
Okay. So I'm assuming mathematical data can come from Mike. He might, need another thing to do, but, he would be able to extract that analytical data. So I guess our charge would be to come up with how are we going to get that anecdotal data. And I'm happy to, if we come with ideas the next time, obviously I'm happy to handle elementary or.
Yeah, I think Mike Bastian will be instrumental in this as far as the hard numbers data. And Regan, I think it's really helpful that you're on this committee. I saw that you weren't, and I was kind of hoping you would come our way because I think getting data from the staff is really important. We're going to talk a lot about community members and we're going to talk a lot about the student experience, but I think the staff experience is equally as important. So I'm really thrilled that you're going to be a part of us because I think that you're going to have a lot to contribute in that sense and how to gather that data. Excuse me.
Yeah, this was the committee that I wanted to be on. So I was waiting for Dr. Wiles to ask me which one. So when she did, I jumped and said, I think of the audit in terms of my world, like when hiring practices in recruiting, in retainment and postings and those things, how we bring people in and obviously recruit diverse candidates. That was the big draw for me, but also the staff side of it as well. Super important.
So as we're getting to 8:05, and I don't want like everybody to just barrage and join our subcommittee when their breakout rooms are closed, would it be, they're just gonna start coming in. Would it be a fair first step for us to come to our next meeting with what we feel are first steps of creating this internal equity audit, whether it be researching other programs or, so that will be like our first subcommittee will really be outlining the steps of the equity audit. gathering, you know, if anybody wants to, we have a folder in the drive. So if anybody wants to gather some resources and put some things in there, I know I was really interested in this because I've done a lot of research on, you know, on some equity issues that we've seen and have seen the power of an equity audit in other places. So I'm excited that we're going to provide some data that's going to really push, you know, to call back to the article, that's really gonna push the work. So.
I think Damien's going to be on our committee as well when he can make it. So
yep.
I'll make sure that when I send the meet out that he's invited.
Definitely, and if you want to help Regan and just kind of update him on what we talked about.
I will. We have a meeting tomorrow.
Great.
I'm glad you brought that up, D, too, because there's already data that we just have to decide what to get.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Welcome back, everybody.
Thank you.
Nice job taking notes.
I think that everyone is back in. Correct me if I'm wrong. But okay. So with that, now that we've returned, let's go over what was discussed regarding our questions. I think that the way that would be most beneficial, considering 8:06, we have about 24 minutes. If we have just general, but I think if we field 2 minutes to each question, just for the sake of time, we could do 4 minutes per question. Okay, so with that, our first question being, what parts of the article do you think speak to our purpose as a committee? Do we have any hands?
Mirza, do we want to have somebody report out from each group and what each group discussed?
I think that was the overall plan, but I think it was more so dependent on if groups had like something significant to share rather than, you know, in something else and they could go more in depth. But does anyone have a first point to make? Yes, Maxine.
I'm with the communications group, and we talked about gatekeeping with experience and how there's less opportunities for people of color to get experience, which prevents them from getting a job if that's a determining factor. So something that we can work on is worrying less about experience and focus more on hiring people with quality resumes and who are right for the job, and give them the opportunity to learn here from some of the more experienced teachers that we have.
Great points. Anyone want to reflect on that or have anything to accompany it?
We talked a lot about in our group with the engagement about how that a theme in this article a lot was having uncomfortable conversations and really in effect to move through and to work on things that it has to be uncomfortable at certain times because none of us have all lived the same life experience. In fact, all 20 of us have a different life experience regardless on this. So there will be times when it's uncomfortable and it's necessary. It's not to fight it and not to try to make everything all happy ending at the end. It's to produce change. We need to work through that.
Great point. Anyone else?
I just offered up my gym analogy to my group, my engagement group. And I asked my friends in my group who had worked out in the gym before and how they felt after. And Elizabeth is an avid gym goer, so she said she felt great. I go, nice, good for you. You go all the time. But for those of us that don't go all the time, initially you feel sore. And that's your muscles breaking apart to build capacity. This is like a social justice gym. Our muscles are going to be sore. We're going to experience pain. But as they're breaking apart, it builds capacity to have these conversations in more meaningful ways and push the work forward in a more meaningful way. So even though we're experiencing pain today, you know, as we keep going to the gym, some of these conversations are going to get easier to delve into and to focus on and go through.
I like that. Do we have anyone else on this point? I'm not seeing anyone else, so I think that we can go to our next question, which is, have you ever seen the actions and impact of gatekeeping in the real world? What can you do to have an impact alongside beneficial gatekeepers? I think that it would be good if we split this question up with the first part going. So have you ever seen the actions and impacts of gatekeeping in the real world? Anyone want to kick us off?
I can share that I work as assistant director for employer relations at UAlbany. And when I started in the career services office, I kept asking questions about why we weren't doing programming around issues of race for our students, because they were going to experience recruitment cycles differently. And when they went into the world, we need to prepare them for what they might encounter in corporate America if they're the only one in all white spaces specifically. And I kept getting hit back with, we're generalists. And I was so confused by that, because I felt like we're here to provide a service and to help at all developmental stages of the career development process. And they weren't taking into account that race could make that different, or make that look different. The education look different and feel different for them. So like, there was definitely gatekeeping there. Like, I don't want to do this. And then as I found resources and allies and, like-minded individuals, now today where we are is we're trying to build diversity and equity standards for our employers that are coming to campus, so that they can show us what they're doing in the space before they recruit our students of color and potentially put them in a place of harm. So to go from that 6 years ago to where we are today just really shows the human being's capacity to change and grow and progress. So that was an example that came to mind for me.
Great, thank you. Kelly?
Hi. Yeah, kind of along that same point, one of the things that we talked about was, I don't have specific examples of guardianship or gatekeepership, but as I read them, I could see, we kind of all discussed is, we could see like a little bit of our own experiences quite a bit in all of these things. And especially kind of as we kind of progress in our careers or in our lives or in our knowledge, I was like, oh shoot, I was kind of this kind of gatekeeper a long time ago, and now I'm kind of this kind of gatekeeper, because I've learned a little bit more. And that's what's kind of exciting about being here, is because, I could take the things that I'm learning here and impart them in either the school, the board, or my own personal life. And I could just see myself in lots of these things, some good, some bad. So that was kind of interesting concept came up for me.
Great. Always good to see some kind of evolution. Anyone else? I'm not seeing any different hands. We can take it to the second part of the question then, which is, what can you personally do to have an impact alongside beneficial gatekeepers? Leah?
I had always thought that the gaslighting gatekeepers concept is going to be a challenge for us here, because we're talking about our own communities and our own friends, and it would be easy to quickly say someone didn't mean it that way, or this is really where our job as this committee is going to have to be, to kind of strip away a little bit of that knee-jerk reaction to downplay the negative experiences and be really to get in there with them. So I think our biggest thing is going to be to really keep an eye out for the gaslighting gatekeepers, even though I think that word is generally overused.
We had a lot of discussion of what is the definition of beneficial gatekeeper. That wasn't really defined in all the gatekeepers pieces. So we were just thinking of different ways of what that meant. And Tibisay said a great thing where it seemed like in this article, or it was great to me anyways, that it seemed to be, kind of pointing to the white individuals, the persons of colors with these gatekeepers, but there are individuals in the POC community that are also these types of gatekeepers. And so that was a lot. I think we had a lot of good discussion around that in our group.
Great, thanks. Andrew.
So do we have a definition?
I think we need to look at this whole concept of gatekeepers, okay? And do we need, or who are the gatekeepers, and do we really need them as gatekeepers? What are the gates that need keeping, you know, and all that kind of stuff? So if we're looking at the power dynamics of change, we have to look at gatekeeping itself, as well as the different kinds of gatekeeping that occurs.
Great. Does anyone have any accompanying ideas from that statement? Any more just fielding to the general question at hand then? Okay, I'm saying none. So with that, I think that we can transition into our third and final question, which is another two-parter. So we'll take it by the two, but the whole question is, in what ways can this committee center people of color to steer? And what other ways can you apply what you have read in the article to support this work in the Guilderland Central School District? Does anyone want to kick us off by answering, in what ways can this committee center people of color to steer? Yes, Nidra?
Being the engagement subcommittee, we talked quite a bit about our role in that specifically and broadening the voice that is being heard when we do dive into this work and getting students of color, parents of color, faculty of involved because they are the people in our school community who have direct experience with issues of race, and a lot of the things that we will be dealing with. So to really center those voices by building awareness for the committee and just getting those people involved, to kind of hand over the reins to avoid telling people what it is that they need, was another thing that we talked about in our discussion, and really let the people who are living this every day or have direct experience steer and be able to guide where we go with this work and where we start.
Great, thank you. I have Tibisai and then I have Seema.
Thinking also about accessibility and our communities that might require translators, right? Sometimes we get into this binary of what we think diversity is, but there are many people in our community that might have English as a second language and might feel like they could express their experiences better in their own language. Time also, we have parents who have various jobs, so thinking about not just having one central time to meet with people, various times to get that, various forms and ways to collect information is also important. So accessibility, our forms being able to be read by screen readers. I'm talking to educators, so I know that I'm kind of beating the drum to the choir, but sometimes we think about the accessibility of our students a lot, but we don't think about potentially the accessibility of our parents. And that is something that I want to always keep top of mind.
Very true. Thank you for that. Finally, I have Seema.
In our group, we talked a bit about building trust and building a rapport with the community because, when this committee was created and some people thought, oh, you're creating a committee, that's going to be the end of that work, but we have to start somewhere. So the discussion was also brought up about who applied to or who sent letters of interest and wanted to participate and who didn't. And so we kind of reflected on, are we creating the environment and are we fostering a culture that is inviting to people to come here? And so thinking about that piece, but then also balancing that with not having the heavy lift of this work on people of color, because we know that that's also an issue. So I guess balancing those two pieces was just something that we talked about and just being cognizant of.
Thank you for that. Leah?
We also talked on the research committee about the opportunity we have to collect voices and stories in a way that that collection process validates the speaker, and then also to some degree present that information in a safe way that we're protecting the privacy of speakers or creating a safe dialogue space for opposing views, and just sort of ways of distilling this information, since everyone's wants to figure out a way to take the narrative story and make it a quantifiable outcome, to sort of facilitate that a bit.
Thank you. Do we have any additional points? Okay. Oh, yeah, Maxine.
This is a bit off topic, but I just wanted to bring this up before it slipped my mind. The 4 students in this group, we don't get emails from adults out of district. So if there's an article that someone sends, it would be helpful for someone in like the school system to forward it to us, because we can't see it. And if like someone's a point of contact, then to have a teacher or someone else get those emails first, that would be great too.
Nicole?
I just wanted to add to something. I was looking in the article about it. Another big point that stuck out to me, though, is that we have to, as a community and as this committee, really work with new ways of doing things. That we can't look at how old ways things were done, because there's been racism built into that, and institutional and different things, or racism or being biased against other populations that aren't, white Anglo-Saxon type of individuals. So I thought that was really important in the article, that is saying we got to kind of take a look at what we did, but we can't work off of that. We got to go forward and start anew.
Great. So if we don't have any for the first part of the question, I think we can take it into the second part, right? That being, what other way? Oh, I see 2 hands. All right, we'll address those before we take the next question. I have Elizabeth, and then I have Lewis.
So I have a quick response to what Maxine said. I was just wondering, would it be possible for the students on the committee to use some other email that isn't the school email, and then we'll be able to actually contact you? I don't think it gets published anywhere. It would just be us that know it, right? So rather than having to go through somebody else, that'd be easier.
Okay. Our next speaker is Lewis.
Oh, yes. About what are other ways? I have said in the breakout session that we may want to sort of try to establish any equity and diversity school district awards to the students and teachers who contribute to this aspect. To me, I think it's very easy to do a fundraiser of like $10,000, and then we invest this into a fund, and yearly return 10%. You got $1,000 to award these. It's not about monetary, but I would say establishing this would be a gesture that we want to promote this. I think that's a great idea. And the other thing I want to suggest is to do some kind of online training material. I actually did some research on the neighborhood school district. Like in East Cuyuna, they have this ECAC, the Environment and Culture Advisory Council, which is similar to this our committee. And they have this, actually this mandatory 2 teachers from each school in training in terms of this race and diversity equity every year. And Bethlehem to my surprise, they established this much earlier in about 2017. They have a basic online training material available called 21-Day Challenge. We can do similar things like online training material, maybe not mandatory, but we want to promote this kind of work to all the community. That's what I would suggest, and I can help on that part. Also, I have a comment about the public comments. We need to take this very seriously. Maybe we can do some research on that part in terms of the basis, numbers and statistics to answer this question. I actually go over all of these over past week, and they're very actually some of them very helpful to our future activities. So we want to kind of circulate this answers to the public comments over our committee, and maybe do a weekly update or feedback to those questions.
Thank you for that. I'm just going to ask that we have Elizabeth and then Seema, and then if we could wrap up to address our public comments.
I just forgot to lower my hand. I have no comment.
Okay. Seema, the floor is yours.
Oh, I just was wondering with Louis, when you were talking about the last part about responding to public comment, could you just explain that? Maybe I missed. Are you talking about one that we read before or just in general?
Oh, I mean, I see one person ask many questions, at least.
Yeah.
8 bullets. Do we want to respond to all of these? Some of them are not quite relevant, but some of them really relevant. We need to ask about the AP class enrollments for the Black students and how that is administrated, something like. I did some research, but I believe we have to give a feedback to them. I haven't seen. Does anybody return their email with definite answer at all? I think this should be done, right? That's my.
Oh, sorry. The email that they sent, I didn't respond. I didn't look up all of that data.
The research committee, our research committee is willing to take care of this if you.
Right. So
certainly we will circulate. Before we send out, we'll send to our committee to review what is the response. Whether that's. I think we really need to feedback to the general public, get their trust. Right? They ask something, we never feedback. That's follow up, no follow up. That's not good. That's my thought. We need to really give them feedback.
Just to respond to you, Louis, I respond when I get an email for public comment.
Oh, okay.
Even if it's not all of the answers, to acknowledge that we received it and we're working on that. But the subcommittee that I'm on.
Are we going to establish a system, or we respond that by a team or a person or what? I agree with any idea, but we got a response to this.
Yeah. So when the public comments come in as a board, we always respond, or at least that's our policy. Is that there's a response if it's not the group. Or just me as a board president, but there's a response, or sometimes it's right from Dr. Wiles, but we just don't see the committee on there. But in response to the data question,
maybe it's my fault. I didn't get to see any response. I thought they, maybe they're not happy.
So maybe we should. I apologize then if I didn't make that clear that we answered the email, so I can make sure that we follow up to say, oh, we responded and this is how we responded. But the subcommittee tonight for the internal equity audit, so we did talk about, that's pretty much, the purpose or function of that group is to gather data about the district And maybe not all of those questions, like you said, some of them were irrelevant, but a lot of those questions were relevant. And so we've heard them in little anecdotes. And so we talked about, you know, gathering quantitative data that the district already has, but also gathering some qualitative data, hearing directly from the students and faculty. And so we could use that data to start answering these questions. So yes, I guess.
Okay, thank you. I maybe I'm not aware of that.
Oh, we just
my
started.
bad. Apologize.
No, thank you.
Oh, I was just gonna say, Elizabeth, I would take your point, but just for the sake of time, we're gonna have to hit our next point on the agenda. Okay, I'm gonna hand it over now to Dr. Wiles, who will address our public comments.
Thank you, Mirzad. While we were meeting, we received 2 public comments, and I'm going to read them both. I'll just jump right in here. One is a little bit long, one is on the shorter side. The first one that we received tonight is from Mrs. Karen Lewis. And she says, "Hi, I wanted to provide feedback on my meeting with Ben Goes and other school board members who participated in my meeting a few weeks back. It was a pleasure to meet everyone, as you seem to be very nice and caring board members. However, my concerns remain the same. Mr. Goes seems to be more concerned with tasking the committee with discussions about what racism is to Black people and if racism has any negative effect on Black people. I fail to see how these types of discussions would create an equitable school environment or a more culturally responsive curriculum that would mitigate the racist experience of the 6 Black girls the board interviewed this summer, or any student regardless of race. The meeting also made me aware that despite the testimony of the 6 Black girls and previous discrimination lawsuits, board members felt they needed to hear more examples of discrimination experienced from Black parents to understand the racism that the Black Guilderland students experience. Therefore, I wanted to let the committee know that I am leading the creation of a Guilderland parent group that will partner with the Guilderland Black Student Union. I remain concerned about the lack of experience of the group members in creating researched, policy-based, and structure that is not race-based, but mitigates racist behavior in practice, such as the use of grading rubrics that would not only benefit Black students, but all students regardless of race, and the group members' ignorance of American Black history, institutional racism, Black culture, history of lynching, enslavement, legislative racist laws such as redlining, Levittown, etc., and the expectation that this equity group will serve as a means to educate the members as if the group is a diversity training professional development course instead of a committee tasked with creating anti-racist policies and procedures to benefit all students. And the second is, hold on one second. Hold on. The second one is from Katie De Leon, I think. I'm pronouncing that correctly. And she says, the issue of racism has been swept under the rug for decades at Guilderland. I'm a graduate of Guilderland Central High School and have 3 biracial children, 2 currently in the school system and 1 who graduated 8 years ago. Our district has an urgent need for a committee like this. My experience, how school administration has handled racist situations over the years was inappropriate. In addition, oftentimes the white students were protected when we brought a situation to the administrator's attention. As a mother, it haunts me that I allowed a former principal to put fear in me and not push back more. Thank you for starting this committee. And that's what I have.
Okay, so with the address of the public comments, those will certainly be addressed either by the steering committee or in the coming sessions between some sort of collaboration. So with that, we have gone past our 8:30 time. Do we have any motions to adjourn the meeting? I have Seema. Does anyone second that? I have Nicole. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Thank you so much.
Good night.
Thank you all for joining us.
Everyone.
Night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.